From meeting and working with 3 presidents as mayor, to cliffhangers about floods, famous people, near disasters, and encounters with a ton of interesting characters, this is Tales from the Gem City with former Mayor Chuck Scholz. Join us for this reoccurring bonus segment. I'm History A Go-Go's host, Rob Mellon. Welcome back, Chuck.
Hey, great to be back, Rob.
We got a very interesting discussion today, and that is Quincy as the City of Refuge. Now, that means a lot of different things. It could throughout our history, but probably most specifically would be when the residents of the city of Quincy, led by the founder John Wood, helped protect the Mormons in that winter of 1838 and 39 when they were fleeing Missouri and trying to get across the Mississippi River.
And it has been called one of the greatest acts of humanitarianism in history. Think about this, Rob. 1,500 Quincyans sheltered 5,000 Mormons.
Right. That's crazy. It's wild.
So just to try to extrapolate, that's like our town of 40,000 accepting 150,000 refugees. You know, what would we do? We have the facilities to house them, to feed them, to care for them, and yet that's what the citizens of Quincy did. And these people were beleaguered. You know, Joseph Smith's long journey started out in Palmyra, New York, and they were in Ohio, came through Illinois, but they had been at a place called Far West, Missouri, which is almost to Kansas, and they were driven out of there by Governor Lilburn Boggs, who I guess issued what was known as an order of extermination. As horrific as that sounds,
right.
Governor Boggs said, you either leave or you'll be killed. And so they started the long march back, going east across the entire state of Missouri. And there's a very well-produced documentary film, and 11 minutes of that video presentation is available at the History Museum at 4th and Main. And it describes this journey, which these are folks that were walking in the winter barefoot. Some of them had, rags wrapped around their bleeding feet. They did not have food. They didn't have proper clothing or shelter. And they got all the way across Missouri, and then they come up against the Mississippi River. But they actually walked across the frozen Mississippi, which in those days was a lot shallower, and we didn't maintain the channel and so forth, and frequently would freeze over. There's a statue in their statuary garden in Nauvoo of Emma Smith with kids literally, you hear the expression, hanging onto your mother's apron strings.
Sure.
As they walked across the frozen river, clinging to their mother's apron strings. So they got to Quincy, and John Wood led these efforts, which were incredible, and established quite a bond with the leaders of the Mormon Church, and I think arranged for their transportation to Nauvoo and for goods to go up the river to Nauvoo from Quincy. And if I'm not mistaken, Rob, John Wood also was involved in 1844 when they organized their expedition to the west after they left Nauvoo, because, of course, there were a lot of logistics involved in that as well. So here we have these Mormons, and people were, they were sheltered in what was then John Square, Washington Park, but in homes all over Quincy. And, Quincy, 1838 to 1839, there were not a lot of accommodations. So you can just imagine. But as you know, Rob, members of the Latter-day Saints are very aware of their genealogy.
Absolutely.
That's a tenet of the religion, and they have the baptism for their ancestors and so forth. So they know their history. My mom was a great genealogist, and before everything became available online, she would go to Salt Lake to use they had the best genealogical library on earth, and she would hire a guide for like a 3-day excursion within the library to do our own family research. Now they have that available all over the country, and the Mormons have really been great on people that are pursuing genealogy. They're extremely helpful. But so when you go to Salt Lake now and you go to the Joseph Smith Center, which is pretty much their Vatican, most of the folks in leadership trace their ancestry to those 5,000 that crossed the river at Quincy. It's kind of like being on the Long March with Mao, I suppose. But those names of the Kimballs and the Snows and the Hinkleys and so forth, those are still major leaders within the church today. And of course, the church is one, if not the fastest growing church worldwide. So they have a lot of international folks as well. But, my visits to Salt Lake have been with folks that all had ancestors that were sheltered in Quincy. So if our listeners would be in Quincy and go down to Clyde Adams Park, there's a monument down there that quotes Joseph Smith, who said that the citizens of Quincy will be held in our everlasting remembrance.
It's pretty amazing.
So folks around the world know about Quincy as a city of refuge. And as you say, it doesn't just apply to the Latter-day Saints, because the year before, mainly through St. Boniface Church, the Potawatomis that were forcibly driven west.
That's right.
Out of Indiana primarily to Kansas and Oklahoma, and they came through Quincy bereft, needing food, needing shelter. And again, the people of Quincy were there, as we were, of course, with the Underground Railroad. People think perhaps Dr. Eels helped 200 or 300 slaves escape through the Underground Railroad and the Mission Institute. So, and, I even think of our own, like my German ancestors who got here in the 1840s.
Right.
And, couldn't speak the language, didn't have a job, didn't have anything. But John Wood sold them their ground at 9th and State, where the Labor Temple is today, and sold a lot of that ground. And he would let them, as you point out in the governor's post, they were able to pasture their cattle on John Wood's land. All of these folks did see Quincy as a city of refuge and did have that opportunity then for shelter and safety and eventually opportunity for the American dream. So, but what happened with the Latter-day Saints really is extraordinary. And I guess I didn't understand the significance to the church until one day at City Hall, back when I was mayor, Lauren Burton and his wife, Annette, who was a member of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, they came in to see me. They were serving time in Nauvoo. The young Mormons go out and do a mission,
right?
Usually around 18 or 20 years old for 2 years, often overseas. But folks that retire often go to work for the church as well. And Lauren Burton had been school superintendent in one of the largest districts in the country, tens of thousands of students, very accomplished guy. And we got to talk. Of course, I was the first thing I do is offer them coffee, Rob. You don't do that. They don't take caffeine. But anyway, we settled in and we started talking about Quincy City of Refuge. And they told me they proposed that we reenact those events, which we then did. Now, it wasn't winter. It was hot that day, but we closed Memorial Bridge. And we had thousands of people come from Utah, Idaho, Canada, Mexico, all members of the church. They gathered in West Quincy, and together they again crossed the Mississippi. This time they did it on foot, Memorial Bridge. And we welcomed them on Main Street, and then we all went to Washington Park. And it was so hot, all the kids, we had the old school fountain in those days, and they all just jumped in the water because we're in period dress and, those old wool. Oh, you don't want to do that in the middle of a Quincy, Illinois, humidity-soaked summer. But that was really neat. And then we ended up the day down on the riverfront with what they called their mission choir, which was, of course, also very good. And we had the park band stage there, and it was a sunset. And I remember turning to their area president, wonderful man named Hugh Pinnock. They divide the earth into 12 sections. So he was the president of the central section, which covered Nauvoo. Since passed away, but really an interesting guy and a great guy. And that started us off. We got along very well. He gave me one of his books, and that started us on our journey with the Latter-day Saints. Soon after that, Jim Mentesti, who was our economic development director at the time, we got invited to go to Salt Lake, and they hosted us. Very educational. We went to the Joseph Smith Center. They had a dinner just for us. They brought out their children's choir. They all are dressed in various international styles. So you got some Dutch kids and African attire and Oriental. And they sang our state song, By Your Rivers Gently Flowing, Illinois. And I look over at Jim Mentesti, he was tearing up. It was very cool. But at that time, President Pinnock told me, he said, here at headquarters at the Joseph Smith Center, 90% of the people in this building had ancestors that were sheltered in Quincy. That means a lot to them. So they educate us a lot about their church because they have a huge relief center there that sends out supplies for floods and earthquakes and hurricanes and natural disasters. They have a huge dairy operation there where members of the church are required to work 1 out of every 10 days. They also took us to a store, Rob, that had no cash registers. If your bishop sends you in that store, you get whatever you need as a member of the church. So you can see how this is a very powerful belief system that works for a lot of people. I mean, the folks that I've known through the church are very family-oriented, optimistic, successful type people. So it's been a really good relationship. So that was my first trip to Salt Lake. Then back in Quincy, I got invited to go to Chicago for lunch at the Chicago Athletic Club, which is a kind of a really neat place that has a great view of Lake Michigan. I went up there, and we were hosted by Elder Neil Maxwell, who, along with President Pinnock, are members of the Quorum of 12. And they have the 70, and then they have the 12. And Neil Maxwell was also son-in-law of Gordon B. Hinkley, who was the president and prophet of the church at that time. So he told us at this luncheon, and I was the only person from Western Illinois there. I'm not exactly sure how that happened, but he told us they were going to rebuild the temple.
Right.
Which, of course, became a massive undertaking. And no one would know what that total cost was, but I can tell you they spared no expense. I was acquainted with the mayor of Nauvoo at that time, Tom Wilson, and he was, obviously, while you're excited about having the temple rebuilt, there's a lot of issues for the community. And first and foremost for him was, their fire department can't handle a 160-foot spire.
Right.
The church bought him a platform truck.
Wow.
About an $850,000 apparatus. So he was worried about parking because, the temple is right in the little central business district of Nauvoo, and you have other merchants and so forth. They built underground parking, which is extremely expensive. But it just, they wanted everything to be fine. And, of course, I went through the temple. I couldn't go in there now that it's consecrated, but they did conduct tours. It was very interesting. So I just, I kept telling my parish priest at St. Peter's, Rob, hey, I'm still Catholic, all right? But the relationship grew. And then they had the groundbreaking for the temple, and that involved President Hinkley, their prophet, Gordon B. Hinkley. And I was very impressed with him. He had a bunch of kids turn the dirt for him. And I thought, wow, this guy's really got a great touch. So Jim and Tessie and I went back for the day they completed the temple, where they have something called the cover stone. You know how they use a cornerstone when you start construction. The cover stone is the last stone laid in the temple. And they had a silver trowel, and they were putting in the mortar. And Jim and I there was a big crowd in Temple Square there. We were way in the back. We just thought, it'd be nice for us to go. And President Hinkley called me up. And I made a little impromptu speech that, you're all as welcome in Quincy today as you were in 1838, 39.
Sure.
And he gave me the silver trowel, and I got to put the mortar in the cover stone of that temple. So it's something I will never forget. So shortly thereafter, he said, we are so grateful to the people of Quincy. We want to demonstrate it. And what we thought we'd do is put on a concert from the Mormon Tabernacle Choir in Quincy, Illinois.
World renowned, of course, yes.
Yeah, because, we have Morrison Theater, which has hosted the Chicago Symphony and the Vienna Boys Choir, now the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. And, it is a first-class facility. I'm glad we're now calling it Morrison Theater rather than junior high, because I remember one year I had Senator Paul Simon was lined up to narrate Copeland's Lincoln portrait with the Quincy Symphony. And I picked him up at the airport, and we're driving in. He said, now, where are we going to do this, Chuck? And I said, it's a junior high. And he was too polite to say anything, Rob, but I could see from his expression, he thought, I'm going to be standing underneath the basket.
In this crappy little gym.
A bunch of folding chairs in this little gym. And I said, no, wait a minute, Paul, I got to tell you, Morrison Theater is awesome. And the acoustics are wonderful. So it's a perfect place to host the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. So Mary Winters and really the Harold Wigg, they were great in sponsoring this, and there was no cost to the community. We were a little concerned because it was June, and you know how Quincy is in the summer, and there's no air conditioning there. Rob, they brought in air conditioning for one day.
Mm-hmm.
I think it cost them about $15,000. Some guy from Iowa came in, and they literally air conditioned Morrison Theater for the night of the concert, which was great because, as it turned out, there were 2,200 people in there. And it would have got a little close otherwise, but it was a magnificent concert. Just coming to Quincy, it involves something like 420 hotel rooms.
Right. Yeah.
The catering bill was over $40,000.
Wow.
And again, all of which they picked up. And then at the intermission, the plan was for myself and President Hinkley to go out on stage, and he presented me with a check for $75,000, which was made out to the Quincy Community Foundation, which really existed only on paper at that time, but that was our initial funding.
Wow.
$75,000. Of course, now thank God the Community Foundation has grown into the millions, but that was the seed money. And what I'll never forget about that night, first of all, they were tremendous. And I had talked to the conductor, Craig Bishop, ahead of time, and I asked him if they would do Battle Hymn of the Republic. And he said, "We'll see, that might be a good encore." He said, "I'll tell you what, if we do it as an encore, I'll turn around and direct the crowd, and you guys sing along, and you can always say that you sang with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir." And indeed, he did do that for the encore. But during the first half of the concert, I'm in a classroom backstage at junior high school adjacent to Morrison Theater with President Hinkley, who's 94 years old and as sharp as anybody you've ever met in your life. So we're going to go out on stage in the intermission. Well, the stage, even though it's a big stage, there's 360 people in this choir.
Right.
So from wing to wing, and maybe, 10 risers high, perhaps, it's all choir. There's just a little narrow strip for us to walk out. And you don't want to step off the stage at Morrison Theater. You go down into the orchestra pit. So I'm worried about Gordon B. Hinkley, President Prophet, who's 94 years of age. And he had a guy with him, that was kind of like the body guy. And he's like, "You're okay? You're okay?" He said, "Yeah, I'm fine. Let's go." So we walk out there, and he tells the story of 1838, 1839 winter in his own family's experience. He never had a note in front of him, Rob, and it was moving. And as he builds up to the climax, and here's the 360 members of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir seated behind him on this stage in their robes. And he's looking out over us 2,200 Quincyans, and he says, "Just to demonstrate to you the impact that this has on our church history, I would like to ask the members of the choir that had ancestors sheltered in Quincy to stand." And Rob, they all stood. A gasp went over the crowd. It's just like that brought it all home. They all stood up. And it was just, I can tell you, after they did their encore, and it was wonderful, watching, they have a way they come off of those risers, it's very organized. And so many people were in tears. It was such an emotional experience for the choir. It was really an incredible night. So that was June, I believe, of 2000. And in December, the National League of Cities was meeting in Salt Lake City. There was always two meetings that I went to as mayor: Conference of Mayors, National League of Cities. Conference of Mayors is only about 150 mayors. And they always meet in January in D.C., and that's your chance to meet cabinet officials, go talk to your elected representatives on the Hill, and so forth. And so I always went to that one. And then they would have this one in December, which was the League of Cities, which really involved, there's probably 10 or 11,000 people that attend that, county board members, city planners, all sorts of people that are involved in municipal government. So the good citizens of Salt Lake wanted to put on a Christmas concert for us. And I had been in the original Mormon Tabernacle, which is a beautiful old oval-shaped building. But now they have a new tabernacle, and it's 3 levels of 7,000 each, so it seats 21,000. And all 11,000 of us municipal officials are there, and then everybody else, the other 10,000, are local members of the Latter-day Saints. So they asked for President Hinkley to come out, and he addresses us all, and he says, I'm so grateful for what you do. I get up in the morning, I turn on my water faucet, that clean water comes out of there, and that's because you run an efficient city government, and just on and on. It was great. He said, but I can't acknowledge all the officials here, so I'm just going to limit it to 2 people. One, our own mayor, Rocky Anderson, and this guy gets like a real tepid golf clap. I was like, I found out
You've
later.
probably been in rooms like that, Chuck.
Oh, yeah. It was not good. And I found out later they really don't like this guy because around Temple Square, they'd had some disputes over sale of alcohol and some other things that really didn't go over well with the church. So in any event, he says, we've got our own mayor, Rocky Anderson. He gets the golf clap. And then he says, and the mayor of our City of Refuge is here, Quincy, Illinois Mayor Chuck Scholz. And Chuck, I know you're out there. Could you stand up? Well, I stand up, Rob, and the whole choir stands up to just start applauding. Well, then all the Mormons, all 10,000. And so next thing, there's 21,000 people giving me a standing ovation. And the guy sits next to me, who's an old buddy of mine. You get to know these mayors. He was the mayor of Las Cruces, New Mexico, a nice guy, and we went to a lot of things together. And so after it's over, I sit back down, and he looks at me like, what in the world?
What was that?
Did you just get a standing ovation in Salt Lake City, Utah, from 21,000 members of the LDS? And I said, yeah, but it wasn't about me. It's about Quincy. It's got nothing to do with me. It's everything to do about my hometown and City of Refuge. And so now, he had identified me. So after the concert's over, all the folks that were volunteering, the ushers and ticket takers and so forth, were lined up. My great-grandfather was in Quincy, and we love Quincy, and many of them had been to Quincy. And I know that a lot of folks that go to Nauvoo also stop in Quincy.
Absolutely. They come to the mansion, they go to the museum.
They don't do that in Carthage.
Not as much, no.
Yeah. A friend of mine used to own the Hardys there, and he said they might come in to use a bathroom, but they're not going to spend a penny in the town where Joseph Smith was martyred, and his brother Hiram. So, they know their history, as we said all along, and they know that Quincy is that City of Refuge. And it really, it's an amazing thing that I hope, Rob, we don't sugarcoat it. We know that, James Earl Ray lived in Quincy too.
Sure.
We got a whole other side to this, but it is a wonderful thing, and something that I hope that we can ingrain and pass on to the next generation through our school kids, that they should know that Quincy has been a City of Refuge. And as you know, Rob, that wasn't common downstate. Most of Southern Illinois was Kentucky and Southerners. It's Quincy. I always start off my talk to school kids by saying, why do you think our Main Street has an E at the end of it?
Sure, yeah.
Even though it's our main street, right? Every other town in America, Main Street is M-A-I-N. And usually there's a smart kid in the class that says, wait, it's the state of Maine, right? Like Vermont, like Hampshire, like York. New Englanders, Congregationalists, abolitionists, people that knew slavery was wrong. I think I heard Reg Ankrum on one of your podcasts talking about how a lot of people wanted Illinois to come in to the Union as a slave state, but because they were part of the Northwest Territory, they had to come in as a free state. But it wasn't too long after 1818 that there was a movement to make us a slave state. And of course, we know that John Wood and others of our founders stood up against that.
That's right.
So we can really be proud of that heritage. Quincy was different, and certainly throughout that 19th century ethic. And we all have to be grateful for that, for our ancestors and forefathers here in Quincy. And as you said, Rob, it always comes back to John Wood, doesn't it? What a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is, every time I see people rip on the state of Illinois, it's always important to remember, we've had our bad moments, as you mentioned, with James Earl Ray and so forth. We've had our bad moments, but we've had our good shining moments too. And before you leave Quincy or want to leave Illinois, you got to remember that this is a great state with a lot of great history and a lot of great people. And of course, Abraham Lincoln, but locally, John Wood and Orville Browning and David Nelson and a whole list of former Quincyans that we should be proud of. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And what happened here was important. And of course, during that mid-19th century, we had Stephen Douglas and William Richardson and Orville Browning and John Wood, who went to the Old Gentlemen's Conference to try to prevent the Civil War. They call it the Old Gentleman. I think John Wood was like 57 or 58, Rob. So as a 67-year-old, I don't think that, of course, 19th century, most folks didn't live much past that. But, that's quite a thing, that if you're going to send some distinguished person from your state to try to sit down and reason and avoid the war, John Wood, former governor, great leader. And again, he had the vision for Quincy and for the diversity and to open things up, even to the extent of, soliciting for German immigrants to come to Quincy and build our city. And of course they did.
And this, of course, is a story that needs to be told because it has national importance. The entirety of the Mormon Church of the Latter-day Saints were here at the time. They were destitute. And the people of Quincy saved a church that you mentioned today has grown to be one of the fastest growing sects of Christianity that there is.
It's continuing to grow worldwide, and of course, it's one of the wealthiest churches.
And that, of course, couldn't happen without the charity of the people of Quincy.
That's right. And everywhere else they went, they were persecuted. And, that continued even
when they went to Nauvoo, sure.
Up in Nauvoo, of course, with the dispute there that led to the exodus west, but not in Quincy. In Quincy, they were welcomed, as everybody was. And that is a great legacy, and that's something that we definitely need to ingrain and pass on to another generation.
Well, thanks a lot, Chuck. That's a great story. And it's amazing that you get a standing ovation from 21,000. That's memorable. I would say that's got to be up there on the list of the most important things or most interesting things that's happened to you.
Yeah, it definitely is. Again, it's just because of Quincy. It had nothing to do with me.
None of your mayor buddies did say, oh, yeah, now his ego's going to go through the roof now. That's the last thing we needed.
I've got a ton of those stories, though, because another good friend of mine, Dan Pierce, was the mayor of Highland Park, Illinois, and he happened to be standing next to me at a White House reception the day that President Clinton was coming to Quincy, because that mayor's conference I mentioned was going on in D.C., and President Clinton always invited us to the White House. And so we're munching on a roll in the Blue Room or whatever, and a young Air Force officer comes up and says, Mayor Scholz, we have to leave for Andrews right away. And Mayor Pierce looked at me and said, what? And I said, oh, well, I'm flying out with the president on Air Force One. And he said, you got to be kidding me. And ever since then, whenever I see him, I get some sarcastic remark about last time I just jumped off Air Force One or Marine One or whatever. But, I've got some kind of Forrest Gump thing where I end up in the right place at the right time, hopefully.
Well, thanks a lot, Chuck. That was really fun.
I enjoyed it, and I can't wait for the next one. Thank you, Rob.
I would like to thank my guest today, former Mayor Chuck Scholz. And if you liked our talk, please share this episode with a friend. And remember to subscribe to the podcast. For more information on authors and other shows, like the History A Go-Go Facebook page. The music was provided by the great North Carolina band Bones Fork. And if you want to know what they have going on, just click on their link. It's in the description below as well. Of course, I have to say thank you to the expanding list of supporters and listeners from over 60 countries now in 1,000 cities. There are many more great episodes on the way, with a discussion on the most peculiar book, The Inherent Strangeness of the Bible, At the Sands, the casino that shaped Las Vegas, Call Sign Chaos, Learning to Lead, the lost history of Ford and Edison's American Utopia, and the amazing history of the First Crusade. So join us again next time when we talk, think, and drink on History A Go-Go.
Yeah.